thousands of companies, and 68% said that they're interested in outsourcing the management of some or all of their contact center seats. That number actually rises, or the percentage of seats that they want to outsource rises when they look at channels beyond voice. Now you might say, well, obviously they're adding chat seats, so they would have more. But the number actually rises, or the percentage rises more than the amount that they're planning to outsource for chat, or for social, or for email, or for messaging, or for video. There's a lot of emerging channels in this world right now. So the omnichannel revolution is actually driving an increase in interest in voice seats. Anybody have a sense of why that might be? I have a theory. It's actually, okay, if nobody does, my theory is this, that it's not actually related just to digital, but as customers start to do more and more self-service, what comes into the contact centers tend to be more difficult, more complex cases. And so as things move more to digital and some of the easier channels, some of the easier problems are solved in those channels, what we're actually seeing is more difficult types coming in over voice. And so there's this perverse effect where increase in digital actually means you need to increase your investment in voice. We ask US consumers in particular about what channels they have used in the last 12 months to try to get customer service. Now, voice is still the top, except unless you include self-service. Web self-service is actually used more than voice. But the other channels are catching up fairly quickly. Email was cited by 68%, chat by 58%, forums and communities by half of the respondents, and Twitter was 37%. Now, two things to note here. Satisfaction is still much higher with voice than it is with those digital channels, but the gap is closing fairly quickly as brands and as outsourcers get experience under their belt in how to handle these channels. Everything from how do you forecast chat volume, which is tricky, to how do you actually engage in a satisfying way with customers over email, for example. So that's point number one. Point number two is the data I threw out there is somewhat misleading because we asked what channels did you use in the last 12 months to try to get customer service. If they used Twitter once, that counts as once. If they use voice 180 times, that counts as once. We have Cindie and Bob, and I was hoping that each of you would take just a minute and let us know what you do.
I'm a consultant. I work with clients, and I take clients and I re-engineer their customer service. So if you are a gaming company, mobile company, or an oddly travel and lifestyle company, be your person. I take those tried and true staid customer service platforms that they have today, and I completely re-engineer them for the modern era.
So Bob Dechant with IBEX Global. We are a outsourcer, call center, contact center services around the globe. 2 centers in the nearshore market, one in Jamaica, and then big presence in the U.S., Philippines, Senegal, UK, et cetera. So do premier brands and also a lot of Silicon Valley cool companies.
Omnichannel is typically thought of in the retail world completely differently than it is in the contact center world, but even in the contact center world, people throw this term around when they really mean multi-channel. In my mind, if you can serve a customer via email and you can serve them via chat and you can serve them voice, that's multi-channel. If you can actually track their movement across and use the context from an interaction on chat to influence and provide a better experience when that same customer then escalates to voice, that's omnichannel. But one of the things that is thrown out quite a lot by the very big outsourcers when we're looking at destinations, particularly like India, is that, yeah, we had accent problems, we had cultural fit problems that were exacerbated by accent problems, but when we moved to digital, nobody can hear your accent in chat. Well, we found that maybe that's not so true. Yeah, okay. Maybe not so true. So is there anything that you would say is, idiosyncratic to the nearshore labor pool that actually does make it a better fit in the digital channels than, the common offshore destinations.
Americans have a very specific cadence. They're also somewhat humorous and satirical. And if you work in Twitter or if Instagram, you'll note that Americans have a tendency to say things that don't mean the same thing as they intended them to mean, depending on how they phrase it. People in the nearshore get our behavior, our sociology, and that's really unmatched outside of the nearshore experience.
So do you have experience, for example, that this is true uniformly across the nearshore regions? Are there some areas that are better for this sort of more casual type of conversation where they may be great on the phone, but when you move to chat or social, that maybe it's a little shakier, and then others where they're stronger?
Yeah, so I'll jump in on this one. I think the answer is yeah. I think it's not, the nearshore market isn't one homogeneous market, and you have strengths and weaknesses across many of the different segments. And I kind of look and say, if you're in the omni-channel, non-voice element, having context, kind of native English and context trumps everything. And it's the same on the voice side, but it's in the chat and email, et cetera, that really trumps. And so,
And context, you mean cultural references?
cultural context, yeah.
Okay.
Context of dealing with growing up on MTV,
Yeah.
basically, and watching that.
But it's not just those guys who are looking at cool technologies, right? In the past month or so, there's been a flood of companies that have come out with pilot programs to do customer support and customer service over Facebook Messenger, including big airlines like KLM in Europe that are doing it, as well as small e-commerce providers, companies like that. We looked at companies doing video chat, and Shoo, for example, which is the the Zappos kind of equivalent in the UK, now has every single agent as a blended agent doing video. We've got SMS, we've got communities, we've got social media, we've now got messaging apps that seem to be on the rise. The pace of change here is ridiculous. And what is it about this particular region that's going to be helpful for brands who are trying to keep up with that pace of change? And then also, particularly Bob, what sort of channels are you getting requests to play around with? What do companies want to create programs around and with? And we can get to follow-up questions after that. But let's start with that one and then move over. Yeah.
Okay, so agree with you. So the cool companies, I have this view that we are the immediacy generation. Everybody, not just the millennials, but ourselves, the older, the gray hairs. It's the immediacy generation, and so the writing an email or for support and saying I'm going to get a response in 24 hours. I love anybody who says, if you see that, are you going to actually do that? 24 hours, or I saw one the other day, 72 hours. We'll try to Bose, I think it was, and I don't think anybody hears from Bose, but Bose said, think of this, premier brand, great product, et cetera, email 72 hours. No, we are the immediacy generation. So what's now driving the change? Well, chat is an immediacy, right? Maybe get a short little cue before I start talking. SMS, I think that's kind of one of the areas of immediacy, right? If you think about, the supply chain back to the call center from an agent, the phone is probably the first path in that supply chain, but it's not the phone. It's the application, right? It's that app. When I communicate with Southwest, right? App.
Service professionals, our goal is to take that conversation right back into the one-to-one. And one of the ways, that we can do that is via the app. It is a great way to reach out, and a lot of companies are going that way, not just Southwest.
Okay, so I'm going to be the analyst here and be a little bit contrarian to both of your points of view. I agree the app is great. There's two big problems. One, brands have a lot of internal silos that make customer service embedded inside of the app problematic. So marketing team builds the app, customer service guy says, I want to do this. They're like, you don't get to touch it. You don't get to put a button here. I've done this for a reason, right? So there's that problem. The other problem is that actually consumers don't download companies' apps. So let's come back then to Nearshore. Everything you said was great, but what about, this particular market that we're talking about?
Well, I think one of the things that you said in opening, that there is no accent in digital, is great and is very true in omnichannel. Again, a picture on Instagram is very indicative of what people do today when they want to make a complaint. And it's capturing that and reacting to that I think is the art form of what we do.
Lots of people, educated people. I mean, here's the thing. If you look at the demographics across the majority of these markets that we just showed, the kids that are 18 to 25, 26, unemployment in these markets 25+%. All the way, I heard one up to 50%. I was talking with one of the countries represented here. Think about that, 25 to 50% unemployment with people that have degrees. They have degrees, and the ability to do an effective interaction in high scale. So the competitive advantage is, I don't think the individual culture or whatever. I think it's the ability to throw very, very talented people in high scale and just knock the ball out of the park. And that's kind of my belief.
But we are starting to see technological solutions out there. Salesforce, who I think, if I was reading your signals correctly there, that's who you were talking about, is also obviously working on this problem too. But, Bob, in our earlier discussion, you said that this wasn't something that most of your customers were coming to you with as a problem, or that they didn't think that you were the right solution for the problem if they felt it as a problem. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And again, putting that in context, the lion's share of our clients have 5, 7, 8 outsourcers, 30,000 seats outsourced across the globe, right? And so, it's very difficult for them to go to one of those providers and say, provide this across your platforms, but not the rest of the business.
One of the advantages, I think, of some of the emerging channels is that the tool providers are doing some of the heavy lifting for you. And what I mean by that is if you look at something like Facebook Messenger, none of the agents for the brands that are using Messenger are responding in Messenger. They're not sitting there on their phone typing away in Messenger. They're using the social platform that they have or the chat tool, and it's just routed as if it was one of those. So, right, that I think would give you the opportunity to ramp up quickly with these other channels. One final thought here, playing off of what you said. I'm going a little off script here. We hadn't talked about this at all. But, one of the things that we've seen in the U.S. with social is that agencies, be they marketing or PR, were some of the first players to get into that space, and it was very boutique, right? We're talking about 5 people, and they could make the value proposition work for them. Sure. Do you think that there's an opportunity in the nearshore market for some of these boutique-y type approaches for the digital and emerging channels, and not have to make that value calculation of, if I do a good job at this, I'm actually pulling voice volume out of my business? That doesn't make any sense, right?
I don't know that voice volume, we used to, back 10 years ago, we would say that voice volume was impacted by different channels. And I saw a couple of studies that said that people were always in those channels, and voice kind of stayed the same. We just added customers. So I'm not sure that we really have that much of an impact, but I would say that they partner well with voice. So for example, the web channel, I have some agents, and again, it depends on the client and what the call center set up for. Work with tech support a lot. In gaming, without the web, the chat is useless. Really, it is. The chat can push you to a knowledge base, and the knowledge base may have an article that you read, or more appropriately, it would have some kind of a driven motion picture, a moving picture, if you will, whether it's a YouTube or, in the old days, deep dive flash. But it's really a tool that you use together. It's the blending of that. Social media is great for complaining, but it can't really solve a lot of issues unless you compare it with something. And again, I would say it depends on the client.
Okay. We've seen a little of what you said and then a little bit different. So to the voice volume, voice as a percentage of overall interactions has stayed flat, but the number of interactions is increasing. So
Right.
the number of voice interactions is still increasing, but we are approaching that tipping point where voice
hope,
volume
yeah.
actually will start to decline in the next couple of years globally, but particularly in developed markets like the US and Western Europe. Which is ironic given the digital first approach of places like Southeast Asia and East Asia, where you would have expected that
Yeah.
first. But on the social side, we actually are starting to see some resolution, but it depends on your definition of social,
Yeah.
right? You move to a private social channel. Is that
Right.
social anymore when it's Twitter direct messaging? It's Twitter. But it's one-to-one, no longer one-to-many. And we are starting to see particularly easy things
Yeah.
where you can resolve it by pushing a URL for some kind of knowledge article in there.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for your time. And Kirk, thanks for having this great event.
Sure, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks.